Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are here with another bit of Lizardmen gameplay, but this time we are on the Cliff of Beasts squaring off with the forces of the Empire. And for this build I wanted to do something a little silly, a little goofy, and rather than going with a more conventional rush build, which I think is the more competitive way to approach the Empire matchup, I decided to try to do a little bit of laser lizard spam, and so that is what this entire build is centered around. Three best build-ons with solar engines, kind of figured would do okay against Empire. I could chip down any sort of foot missiles, potentially overwhelm, say, a single cannon. You usually won't see too much artillery from Empire, you might see like one unit. And so I figured with the blind debuff, I'd probably be able to outtrade a single cannon and whittle down any infantry my opponent might bring, and then do sort of clean up in aisle 9 once all of their key targets, such as handguns and artillery and maybe cavalry, have been whittled down. And of course, Empire doesn't really have, unlike say High Elves, doesn't have fire-resistant units, so you'll do okay against everything. Obviously, won't be chipping models off, say, Demigryph Knights, because the AP missile damage just isn't there. But even then, I'm not sure. Maybe we'll still do enough just to barely one-shot models. But against most things, you'll do quite a bit of hurt. And of course, keep in mind, blind nowadays does not affect friendlies, so you can, in fact, blind an enemy front line and allow your support troops to do work. Besides that, for my lord here, I'm rocking Croc-Gar. I figured I wanted something that can defend against, say, Karl Franz or a big elite lord. And Croc-Gar, while certainly not sort of an apex predator here on his horned one, he's a solid enough combatant. He does have that bonus for large. He's got passable combat stats, Hand of the Gods, of course, Swiftness of Etzel, and then Sacred Spawning of Zodal, which makes him pretty beefy, pretty tough to shut down. Alongside him, we do have Lore of Manticore here, King Priest of Beasts, who's coming in with the Flock of Doom as well as Transformation of Kadon, of course, Wild Heart, and he's just cheap and cheerful, looking to cast some Manticores and disrupt the backline for my opponent. For our front line, we do have a handful of Stars Warriors, as well as the Regiment around Legion of Chaka. Once again, I was a little worried about artillery, and as it so turns out, that's kind of what my opponent's gone heavy on here, but Legion of Chaka, of course, does provide that ability, the Shield of Chaka, which gives you 44% missile resist. That's why these Pistolons are so clumped, to get that benefit when needed. 2 units of Chameleon Skinks are out front, skirmishing, ready to poke away at, say, Marcus Wolfheart, or chip away at enemy spears or guns, and just be a general nuisance and disruptive force. And behind that, in the back, we do have some Colon Spear Riders, just there to provide some anti-large staying power. And of course, as you can see, I did deploy them far back. In my opinion, it's good to be a little cautious with your more expensive heavy cav. I don't want them getting sniped out early on by artillery. For my opponent, he has gone with Marcus Wolfheart, who is immediately shooting at my poor laser lizards and does quite a lot of damage there. Amber Bow, despite the 15% missile resist in the armor, knocks this poor guy down by about 1700 or so HP immediately, or maybe a little less, maybe like 1200 or 1300, but still does quite a lot of damage. Now, of course, the Hammer of Witches as well as the Great Cannons are opening fire. And of course, we don't have, say, Mazdamundi here, who'd provide a passive extra missile resist. So while we do have the Shield of Chaka, these guys will still take quite a pounding. That said, Chameleon Skinks are going to push forward and look to pressure Marcus Wolfheart away. They are faster than he is, and of course, with their poison, they will do quite a number on him. For the rest of my opponent's build, it is a mix of Spearmen and Greatswords in the front line. Greatswords actually pretty powerful against Lizardmen. They'll trade well into all their lower-end troops, and you need Temple Guard to beat Greatswords in an infantry fight, which obviously is not something Lizardmen will bring, especially not in large quantities. So Greatswords can win you a frontline fight, and in the meantime, we've got some Halberds out on the flanks. Once again, good screening tool against the big stuff. Some Knights for additional mass. And then we do have a Witch Hunter and Silver Bullets for a little bit of point defense here in the center. And I don't think that is necessarily a bad idea. What this build is lacking, however, is a mage, and I think that's a bit of a mistake with a man spam build like this one. I think you could easily cut down one of these halberds to, say, a spear and get a very cheap mage. You probably need to cut a little more than that, but you could probably cut one of these spear units and could downgrade one of the halberds and get a Lore of Lightcaster, for example, for net. Obviously, that's turning illegal. That said, we're going to push forward here. Bastillodons, of course, taking advantage of that Shield of Chaka, looking to push onward. Chameleon Skinks here, chipping away at Marcus, who's wasting his shots on them. Does pick off a few of the poor little buggers. You can see they're kind of splattered there in ruins, but they are whittling him down, and the Huntsman is being forced to back the hell away. And of course, keep in mind, these guys do have missile resist, so if my opponent starts chipping away at me with the Silver Bullets or the Witch Hunter, it's not going to do maxed out damage. And you can see here, I was trying to swarm in on Wolfheart, just get into close quarters, but it doesn't work out. He does drop that Hunter's Lure, And I started opening fire here with the Bastillodons, thinking I could probably hit these great cannons. You can see there we whiff, hit the Empire Knights. But as it turns out, Laser Lizards have a very bad arc of fire, and I expect them to have a little bit better because I don't use them very often, and they do have a pretty high position up here on the Lizards. I assumed I could shoot over my opponent's head, but as it turns out, no, I can't. And so the Bastillodons here kind of having their shots soaked up by the Spearmen, and things are looking a little bit hairy. We can see another focused shot going in and just tearing apart this Bastillodon. I popped Cold-Blooded trying to keep him in the fight, but it doesn't work out. Saurus Spears, though, are going to be clashing here with the Spearmen. Saurus Warriors over there, and we're looking to get a big old engagement here on the front line. In the meantime, the Bastillodons are just kind of piling through, trying to get those shots off, and actually popping a few shots there at the Huntsman. Wolfheart there, not having a good time. And you can see Krokgar swinging in from the flank, looking for an opening. Pops Hand of the Gods, eclipses the Witch Hunter a little bit, but really tears apart Marcus. And he no longer has that snare, so I don't have to worry about that. Silver Bullets will beat Krokgar up a little bit, but before they can do enough damage, we are going to pull back to safety, and the infantry horde pushes onward. Unfortunately, with Accusation down on the Bastillodon, it has no missile resist, and cannons, of course, will do a massive number on it. So really not ideal at all. We are pushing forward to engage here. You can see the Legion of Chaka looking to absorb shots, but you can see good old Marcus, just an absolute nuisance, chipping away at the Bastillodon and terrorizing me for days. More Greatsword in the meantime swing around this flank. You can see we've actually managed to engage here on the Empire Knights. A bit of a slip up here with my Cold One Knights, with my Chameleon Kings getting them in this melee here. Definitely not ideal, but hopefully we can tear up these Empire Knights and pull back in time. Halberdiers over here getting beaten down by Saurus Warriors. Big misplay on my opponent's part was letting these guys get caught in the charge instead of holding their ground and taking advantage of their expert charge defense. In the meantime, the Laser Lizards continue firing away at Marcus Wolfheart, and this priest, who was of course on foot, is finally sort of trundling into range to cast a Manticore summon. And so Lord of Manticore, of course, got to do work here. Now, unfortunately, the Bastillodon here just getting shot to death, Cold-Blooded, not doing enough. Knights do get routed here. But as you can see, those Greatswords really carrying that front line. Things are not looking ideal. It's currently, the balance of power is pretty even. But if we take an overrushing look at the battlefield, the Greatswords are winning that frontline fight with a bit of support from the Silver Bullets and Marcus Wolfheart. And of course, all that artillery. My big boys are routed off, and I have no heals for them. So the Bastillodon here is being run off by the cannons, and I have not been able to compromise my opponent's backline. The Cold One Spear Riders here kind of getting bogged down. The Legion of Chaka are just about gone and actually taking friendly fire there. And although a net does go down here, it's going to prevent my Cold One Spear Riders from getting in. So my opponent just tearing me apart with that focused gunnery. But the Manticore is coming in, and of course, he's got a target. He's got Marcus Wolfheart, and the Huntsman is looking like he's on the menu. Takes a nice meaty blow there from the Manticore. It's not where he wants to be in life, and he dies. 2 hits. He was very, very crippled already. And that is going to start shifting things a little bit, because my opponent, it's Empire. Empire doesn't have the best leadership, and we do still have some terror on the field. We do still have an almost full HP Bastillodon. We do still have an extra Manticore summon in the bag, and suddenly things are looking a little bit better. Certainly not hot, but better. You can see the Manticore here now going after the Witch Hunter, whittling that guy down. My opponent not able to really stop the Manticore. He is trying. He's trying to get those Empire Knights in there. The Manticore's already paid for itself. It does get Rampage here, hit with an Accusation, which I think is kind of wasted. It actually terrorizes the Empire Knights, though, and slams that Witch Hunter flying. In the meantime, Greatswords here routed off, and as you can see, Cold One Spear Riders here pulling back. A bit of a misplay on my part, though, plumping him up. I should have probably rallied him somewhere out there. But Laser Lizards does start unloading on the flanks of these Empire State troops, debuffing them greatly. And as we can see, Krokgar now tackling the Witch Hunter. He's not in here for that human nonsense, and this guy just does not stand a chance. He's just caked in blood, probably the blood of Marcus Wolfheart, who was run over by that poor man, by that Manticore, poor man. And although that Manticore does topple to the ground, Krokgar is just having a field day. And as you can hear, another Manticore rises from the depths, crackling with energy there, looking to dive in on the Silver Bullets and put them out of commission once and for all, and thus allow Krokgar to be the monster he was meant to be. Empire Knights there do try to tackle him, but lose 4 models in a single swipe of the Spear of Langsla. And Krokgar just having a field day, sacred spawning, making him an absolute beefcake. My opponent does not have much to sort of stop him. And so all of a sudden, the situation that was very grim is swinging back in our favor. We've actually managed, by removing Wolfheart and that leadership core, we've managed to chain off a bunch of routes. Leadership buckling. The Bastillodons are still online, in fact, except one of them, I believe, has been routed off. This one's probably not long for this world, but we do still have a Bastillodon. And engaged in melee now. Saurus over here winning rather convincingly, and Crocky G coming back. Things are looking rather good. Manticore diving in on the Hammer of Witches, doing quite a number on it. This artillery piece, pretty powerful, and really one of the main reasons my opponent is still in this fight in the balance of power. One big concern for me was getting rid of these greatswords. So you can see the Coldstone Spear Riders pursuing them rather angrily alongside the Chameleon Skinks. I really do not want my opponent's elite infantry coming back. If, for whatever reason, my opponent was able to rally his troops down this top of this Great Cannon, this match could still very much swing in his favor. Because, well, his Manticore is going to be gone soon, and once that's gone, I've got a really haggard formation of infantry and a near-dead Bastillodon. So once that Bastillodon's gone, I got to grind it out. And a few decent HP greatswords could certainly swing the tide still. Silver Bullets, though, are getting pressured off. You can see Krokgar there getting penned in by the Knights, but the Knights can't really beat Krokgar. A Flock of Doom does go down, melting the state troops, and of course debuffing their leadership, which is going to allow the Manticore to tear out, potentially. Hammer Witches is really on the ropes right now, actually loses its morale there and breaks, and that is going to be it for my opponent. Actually, the Great Cannon grew routing basically unharmed, but a pure victory for the Lizardmen. And given that my opponent hadn't brought a caster, definitely a very, very close game. Now, obviously, the build here is a bit memey. I would not consider this a competitive or good build to bring against Empire. And I think the build my opponent brought here was almost about as good as you could get as far as a counter goes, just this build specifically. I think a Lure of Light caster would have really sealed the deal if he had a backup net. Or even if he had just had magic in general. If you had like Lure of Fire, you could snipe out my Skink Priest, deny those Manticores, something along those lines. So I do think this build here is not bad against this sort of thing. I do think this build is a little more susceptible to a more swarmy Lizardmen build. But ultimately, I really just think the lack of caster here is the big killer. Besides that, I don't think a nice balanced formation like this is a bad thing against Lizards. They will certainly struggle to bust it. Maybe a little more point defense, maybe a handful more handguns. But on an open map like this, where the cannons can really do work against big monsters, it's not as necessary as it might be on, say, a more enclosed map where you won't get the artillery volley you need. But yeah, wouldn't recommend this build. I was rather pleased with Krokgar. He did pretty well. The Laser Lizards, I was disappointed by their bad arc. I knew that they're obviously flat projectile trajectory, but I assumed it would be better than it was because, well, I'm used to using cannons and outriders, and at long range you can often arc over your opponent's line, or if you've got a little bit of height that you're shooting from, like in the case of an outrider, it's not as bad. You can actually shoot over formations, and the Laser Lizard here just seemed unable to do that. It just was shooting into infantry that was really close to it, even when the target was far away. So I'm not sure what is up with that. If it's just that I've misjudged how flat the trajectory is. I do believe the trajectory on the Laser Lizard is a little even flatter than the cannons, but I'm not entirely sure. Either way, I feel pretty disappointed with them. But otherwise, I do think, swarming with a bunch of cheap trash, Saurus are rather solid in this matchup. Just like Great Swords are good for Empire here because they beat down everything cheaper than them very efficiently. For Lizards, Saurus aren't a bad pick because they beat down everything cheaper than them. And a lot of Empire builds are not going to include Great Swords. They're going to include a lot of state troops. And even if they do bring Great Swords, you can focus the Great Swords down with other units, and in the meantime your Saurus can run rampant against everything else. They'll tear up, honestly, even Empire Knights, they'll tear up Halberdiers, Spears, all those units pretty effectively. So it's definitely a bit of give and take there. Empire needs to get its Great Swords on target, and Lizards want to avoid taking fights with Great Swords. But all in all, was pretty satisfied here. For my opponent's build, yeah, I don't think it's a bad build. It's definitely a little sort of gimmicky and sniping oriented, but I'd probably just recommend bringing a caster. There are certainly builds you can get away with without bringing a caster, but I would recommend one. You have so much infantry and chaff here, you could definitely make room somewhere for a very, very cheap caster. I believe Empire Wizards cost $250 base, and then you pay like $100 for a spell, so you could literally cut one of these spears, or like cut the chevrons, and cut the unshielded spears, and you could get a mage with a single 1 or 2 spells on foot. So just my 2 cents there. Otherwise, we'll play Defederon Zolo here. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the video. As usual, leave your thoughts, opinions, comments, and critiques down below. I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.